The afternoon began like many others in Claire Bennett's quiet neighborhood, calm and ordinary, yet something unseen was already shifting beneath the surface. Claire stood in her backyard garden, sleeves rolled up, hands deep in the soil as she tried to pull out stubborn weeds that refused to let go. Gardening had become her routine since the divorce. Not because she loved it at first, but because it gave her something steady to return to when the house felt too silent. The birds chirped softly, a lawnmower hummed somewhere down the street, and the air carried the mild warmth of early summer. She paused to straighten her back, feeling the familiar ache in her shoulders when she noticed movement near the fence. A shadow fell across the roses, followed by a calm, polite voice asking if she needed help. Claire looked up, surprised, and found herself face to face with Ethan Miller, her neighbor's son, holding a pair of work gloves and wearing a relaxed smile. She had seen him plenty of times before over the years, mostly in passing, mostly younger, but this was different. He wasn't a boy anymore. He looked older, more settled, with a quiet confidence that made her momentarily forget what she had been doing. For a brief second, she considered declining, out of habit more than reason, but something about the way he waited without pushing made her nod instead. Ethan stepped through the gate carefully, as if entering not just a yard but a private space, and immediately began helping without taking over, pulling weeds, clearing soil, matching her pace. They talked as they worked, not about anything deep at first, just simple things: how long he had been back in town, how the neighborhood hadn't changed much, how the weather felt kinder this year. Claire noticed how easy the conversation felt, how there were no awkward pauses, no need to explain herself. Ethan listened closely, responding with short, thoughtful comments rather than long stories of his own, and that alone made her feel strangely at ease. As they moved from one corner of the garden to another, Claire felt time move faster than usual, as if the afternoon had suddenly found purpose. She told him about the roses she planted after moving in, how they almost died the first year, but survived anyway, and Ethan smiled at that, saying some things just needed patience. The words stayed with her longer than she expected. She caught herself noticing small details: the way he brushed dirt from his hands before touching a plant, the way his tone stayed gentle even when joking, the way he never once made her feel rushed. It had been a long time since anyone stood beside her like this, not needing anything from her, simply sharing the moment. The sun slowly lowered, casting longer shadows across the yard, and Claire realized her earlier tiredness had faded, replaced by a quiet energy she hadn't felt in years. So when they finished clearing the last patch, Ethan stepped back and looked around with a sense of satisfaction that felt shared, as if the garden belonged to both of them now in some small way. Claire thanked him, meaning it more deeply than she expected, and as she wiped her hands on a towel, she noticed Ethan hadn't moved to leave. He stood there, looking thoughtful, almost nervous, his gaze drifting from the garden back to her face. The shift in the air was subtle but real, like the calm before a question. Claire felt it too, a sudden awareness that this afternoon had become something more than help with weeds. Before she could speak, Ethan took a slow breath, his voice quieter than before, and said there was something he wanted to say. In that moment, Claire felt a gentle tightening in her chest. Not fear, not excitement exactly, but recognition. As if her heart knew this day would not end the same way it had begun. The work continued. But the feeling between them changed in a quiet, noticeable way, as if the garden itself had grown more attentive to their presence. Claire moved to the far side of the yard, trimming back a row of overgrown plants, while Ethan followed without being asked, lifting fallen branches and clearing the path so she could move easily. Their conversation deepened naturally, not into heavy confessions, but into honest reflections about life as it was now. Ethan spoke about leaving the city after realizing he was chasing things that didn't truly matter to him, explaining how the noise and pressure had worn him down, while Claire listened with a soft focus, recognizing the look in his eyes. The same one she had seen in the mirror after her own life shifted. She shared how the house felt different since she started living alone. Not lonely exactly, but quieter, and how the garden became a place where she could think without being interrupted by old memories. Ethan nodded, understanding without asking. Too many questions, and that made her feel respected rather than examined. As they worked, Claire became aware of small moments that felt meaningful, like the way Ethan stepped aside to let her lead. Or how he asked her opinion before moving a plant, as if he valued her sense of order and care. Time passed quickly, the sun climbing higher and warming their backs, and with each shared task, the distance between them seemed to shrink. Not physically, but emotionally, as if trust was being built without effort. Claire caught herself smiling more often, surprised by how comfortable she felt, how easy it was to be present without guarding her thoughts. Ethan noticed it too, and his tone softened, his words becoming more thoughtful, as though he didn't want to break the calm that had settled around them. At one point, he paused and looked around the yard, commenting on how peaceful it felt, saying it didn't seem like just a garden, but a place where someone had put their heart. The comment stayed with Claire, touching something tender inside her, because it was true. She had poured her patience, her healing, and her quiet hopes into this space without realizing it showed. The work slowed as the tasks were nearly done, and they found themselves standing closer than before, not out of intention, but because the space between them no longer felt necessary. Claire noticed how Ethan avoided any gesture that might feel too personal, keeping his hands to himself, maintaining a respectful distance even as the mood grew warmer, and that restraint made the moment feel safe. The sounds of the neighborhood faded into the background, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the steady rhythm of their breathing. When Ethan finally stepped back, brushing dirt from his jeans, he looked satisfied but thoughtful, as if the afternoon had given him something he hadn't expected. He glanced at Claire with a seriousness that caught her attention, his earlier ease replaced by careful focus, and she sensed that whatever he was about to say mattered to him. Her heart beat a little faster, not from worry, but from curiosity, and a growing sense of connection she hadn't planned for. She waited, silent, giving him space, knowing that some moments didn't need to be rushed. The garden stood calm and complete around them, but inside Claire, something new was unfolding. Something fragile and hopeful. As Ethan drew a slow breath and prepared to speak words that would shape how she remembered this day long after the soil had settled and the sun had moved on, Ethan's words came slowly, carefully, as if he had rehearsed them only in his mind and not yet spoken them aloud. And Claire felt an unexpected tension tighten in her chest, a mix of anticipation and curiosity. He didn't rush or stumble, but instead let silence settle between them, letting the garden itself hold their attention for a brief moment before he spoke again. "When I came back home," he said quietly, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the fence, "I didn't expect much. I thought I'd just stay here for a while, keep my life simple, figure things out. But seeing you here day after day, it made me feel something different, something I didn't know I was missing." Claire felt a warmth rising in her chest, a flutter that made her forget to respond immediately. He stepped a little closer, but not in a way that threatened her space, just enough to bridge the invisible distance that had been between them for years. "I never realized," he continued, "how much I needed someone to remind me that life can be steady, that beauty can exist even in ordinary days. It's watching you care for this garden. It made me see that patience and care can bring more than just flowers. They bring hope." Claire's throat tightened, and she swallowed, unsure how to answer without breaking the fragile honesty hanging in the air. She hadn't expected this, not from him, not today, not in the calm of her own backyard. His words were gentle, sincere, and unassuming, and yet they carried weight. It's the kind of weight that makes you pause and reflect on everything you thought you knew about yourself. I know this may sound strange, Ethan said, glancing at her briefly, his eyes steady. But you remind me that life doesn't stop when things go wrong. Just asks us to keep moving, to keep caring, to keep seeing the little things that make days worth living. Claire felt a tear threaten to fall, not from sadness, but from being seen in a way she hadn't felt in years, as if someone truly understood the quiet spaces of her heart. She wanted to speak, to say something that would match his honesty, but the right words wouldn't come. They felt too fragile for the moment. Ethan noticed her hesitation and gave a small, understanding nod, like he already knew she didn't need to speak to acknowledge the connection forming between them. You don't have to say anything, he whispered, and the sincerity in his voice made her ache with unspoken emotion. I just wanted you to know how much you means to me. The words hung in the air, a delicate promise, a truth neither had expected to reveal today. Claire's hands, still covered in soil, rested lightly on the edge of a flower bed as she looked at him, seeing not just the neighbor's son she had watched grow up, but a man who carried care, thoughtfulness, and a rare gentleness that touched her in ways she hadn't felt for years. She realized that all the quiet afternoons, all the time spent tending to plants and watching life slowly unfold, had led her to this moment. A moment where nothing dramatic happened except honesty, and yet it felt monumental. The garden around them seemed to respond to their emotions, leaves rustling in a soft breeze, petals catching the sunlight as if witnessing the truth shared in silence. Claire's mind raced, filled with memories and hopes. But her heart stayed rooted in the present, listening to the sincerity of Ethan's words. There was no rush, no expectation, only a pause that allowed them to feel the gravity of the moment. Together. When Ethan finally fell silent, he looked at her with quiet patience, waiting not for a response, but for her to simply exist in this shared understanding. Claire's lips parted, ready to say something, anything, but she found herself smiling softly instead, letting the warmth of connection speak for her. It was enough, more than enough, to know that someone had noticed her, truly noticed her, in a way that went beyond polite conversation or casual neighborly concern. Time seemed to stretch, the afternoon holding them in its soft embrace, as if the garden itself recognized the subtle shift in their relationship. Words were spoken, yes, but it was the unsaid feelings, the mutual respect, and the gentle understanding that made the moment linger far longer than the sun would stay in the sky. And in that quiet, Ethan's presence and his words settled deep into Claire's heart, planting seeds of hope and curiosity that would grow long after he left the garden, leaving her in stunned, silent reflection, realizing that today had changed everything in ways she hadn't even imagined when she started pulling weeds that morning. The afternoon was fading, the sun dipping lower, painting the garden in golden light as Claire and Ethan lingered in a quiet understanding that neither had expected but both felt deeply. The work was done, the weeds pulled, the plants arranged neatly, yet neither of them moved to leave immediately. The air between them held a charged stillness, a mix of gratitude, recognition, and something unspoken that neither wanted to rush. Claire felt her chest tighten, not with fear but with a strange warmth she hadn't felt in years, a reminder that life could still surprise her with moments that mattered. Ethan stood a little apart, hands resting lightly at his sides, looking at the garden with a small smile that suggested he shared her feelings without needing words. Claire noticed every detail, the way his hair caught the sunlight, the calm steadiness in his posture, the gentle sincerity in his eyes. He spoke softly, careful not to disrupt the fragile magic of the moment, saying, "I should go, but I'm glad I helped today." His words were simple, but they carried more than a thank you. They carried acknowledgement, respect, and a gentle closeness that had been built in hours of quiet work and shared presence. Claire nodded, her voice steady but warm. "So am I." It was more than a reply. It was a reflection of the connection that had formed, a mutual recognition of something rare and unforced. As Ethan walked to the gate, The moment stretched between them, neither pushing for more nor stepping back in awkwardness. He paused briefly, glancing at her with a soft seriousness, and Claire realized that everything they had shared, every word, every look, every silent pause had shifted something in her heart. He left with the quiet respect of someone who understood boundaries, yet the memory of his presence lingered like the scent of fresh flowers in the garden. Claire stayed for a moment, looking at the space they had shared, noticing how ordinary the garden looked, yet how extraordinary it felt to her. Now the soil seemed richer, the flowers brighter, as if reflecting the new awareness she carried inside. That evening, as shadows lengthened and the neighborhood grew quiet, Claire walked slowly through the paths they had cleared, touching leaves and petals with renewed care, thinking about the gentle courage it took to speak honestly, to share feelings without expectation, and about the unspoken bond that had quietly formed between her and Ethan. She realized that the day had brought more than help with the garden. It had brought a mirror reflecting the parts of herself she hadn't noticed in years. The parts that still wanted to be seen, appreciated, and connected to someone who understood them. The house felt different when she finally stepped inside, not just because of the fading light or the cool evening air, but because the quiet had changed, filled with the promise of possibility. The recognition that life could be tender, honest, and unexpectedly warm. Claire's thoughts wandered back to Ethan, wondering if he felt the same lingering pull, the same gentle curiosity about what could grow from this afternoon. She smiled softly, realizing that sometimes the most profound connections didn't need dramatic declarations or grand gestures. They simply existed in shared moments of honesty and care. The garden, now orderly and blooming, stood as a witness to that afternoon, a reminder that simple acts, pulling weeds together, clearing paths, tending to flowers, could create space for emotions, reflection, and unexpected intimacy to flourish. Claire felt gratitude not just for his help, but for his words, his patience, and the way he had allowed the afternoon to be real and unhurried. There was no rush to define anything, no pressure to act, only the quiet understanding that something meaningful had begun. Something that might continue to grow in small ways, in gestures, conversations, and shared time. Night fell, and the first stars appeared. Claire lingered by the garden, feeling the weight of the silence, not as emptiness, but as fullness, filled with unspoken possibilities and tender emotions. She knew that life would return to its normal rhythm tomorrow, but something fundamental had shifted within her, a reminder that human connection, even quiet and gentle, could transform ordinary days into moments remembered for a lifetime. That evening, as she closed the gate and stepped into the house, she carried with her the calm, hopeful certainty that some moments were meant to linger quietly in the heart, shaping thoughts, emotions, and dreams without fanfare, leaving her in a state of wonder and anticipation for what might come next. A quiet thrill that made the ordinary extraordinary and the simple act of sharing a garden into something unforgettable.